Welcome back, dear viewers. You're watching Asian Vibes, and today we're talking to Dreeni Geer, the Director of Human Rights and Equity at Lakehead University. So, Dreeni, we were talking about understanding human rights, the legislations and the laws that governs them, but I want to know if it's, how do we have, is there any distinction between these two terms? In terms of definitions, in terms of objectives, in terms of outcomes.
Between human rights and equity?
Equity, yeah.
Yeah, there is a distinction. So many times, well, we have to remember that our society is not an equal society. If it was a perfect equal society, we would not have things like human rights laws, because we wouldn't have to think about oppressed or marginalized groups. So human rights basically recognizes, as human beings, simply by being born as humans, what are the rights that we all have, that we should cherish and support for each other, to make sure it's sort of a level playing field for everybody, regardless of the various grounds that are protected. And those are the human rights. When we speak about equity, equity is often the ways that we achieve equality for everybody. So if we look at, for instance, pay equity, that's specifically talking about how do we ensure that women and men are paid the same amount of money for the same amount of work. But when we look at equity from different lenses and concepts, it could be, when we look at job employment equity, we're looking to make sure that there's, equal representation that's reflective of the population. So it is distinct, but it's still very much a part of how we do human rights programming.
Thank you. And now I would like to share with you a quote from Mahatma Gandhi, father of our nation, India. Our ability to react or to reach unity in diversity will be the perfect present for the test of our civilization. Which is leading to my next question: what role does multiculturalism play in this broad paradigm of human rights and equity?
Well, I think multiculturalism is, well, first of all, as Canadians, I think it's something we cherish. We were the first country to declare multicultural policy, and I think it was recognizing that aside from the Indigenous and Aboriginal people, we all come from somewhere else. And so that to ensure that we all have a society that respects human rights, that is harmonious, that creates a place for everybody. We needed a formal policy recognizing that, because it was clearly seeing that there was a majority and a mainstream that was not allowing space for others. So formal policies come and say, you know what, we need to make space for everybody. And I think when we reflect on broader human rights, multiculturalism is a great place to start, because it says, you know what, regardless of where you're from, regardless of what your religion, your color, your creed, your ethnicity, etc., that you have a right to be in this country, and you have a right to thrive and prosper, and human rights will make sure that it's a level playing field for everybody.
Dreeni, you have an extensive work experience. You've worked across countries. Share some, very briefly first share where the places you've worked, and then maybe we go into some experiences.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate with my career to work in many different countries around the world. Sometimes it was for very little money, others were better contracts. So I've spent a lot of time in South Asia. I have worked in Pakistan, Bangladesh. I've done a little bit of work in Nepal and India. And I've worked a lot in Southeast Asia too as well, Thailand and Indonesia primarily. I've also worked in Europe. I worked in Sweden for a little while. And I'm originally from Guyana, so I was actually able in law school to do a brief position in Guyana. But most recently I was working in East Africa, in Uganda, and a bit in the Congo, in various human rights areas.
And different organizations, I guess.
Different organizations. So most recently I was with War Child Canada in Uganda, yes.
Very impressive. And we are lucky to have you here.
I'm lucky to be
and
here.
To contribute to it. So, and the nature of these work, were there different kinds of human rights issues that you were looking into?
Yes, so definitely. So after law school, I decided, I always use my phrase that I wanted to use my law degree for good. And so I really wanted to learn about human rights and learn about it from the context of different places, different people, to really get a global understanding of, if we talk about human rights, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be part of humanity? And so I really took a broad look at it to try to work in different places and to get an understanding of the various areas. So I have worked in I do have a specialization in women and children's rights, but I've worked in indigenous rights, I've worked in refugee and immigrant rights, and so I think I've dabbled a little bit here and there, you know, across the various continents, just to get that, what I feel is a very universal approach to human rights.
Any special experiences or any projects that you have been really happy, even with a small little play, but anything, any projects that you would like to share?
Well, I'm really most proud of the most recent work I did in Uganda. So when I went there, it was to work with the in access to justice programming for conflict-affected people in northern Uganda. So this was post the LRA war. There was a lot of occurrence of sexual violence, and I was leading an organization that was doing really well in access to justice. So both doing outreach to people as well as providing actual legal aid. So we had outreach workers, we had trainers, we had actual lawyers. And then when the war in South Sudan hit, I was actually able to grow that program so that we were actually mobile legal aid clinics throughout the refugee settlements, and so that people could have access to justice whether they were refugees or not, and specifically focusing on sexual violence. So that's something that I'm very proud of, and ensuring that, you know, true access to justice for probably the most marginalized and vulnerable people in the world, which are refugee women and children. Yeah.
And if someone wants to pursue this line of work or practice in this line of human rights issues, what is the academic background or academic qualification required? And is there, I don't know about Thunder Bay Law School, but is there any other places in Ontario where you can pursue these subjects? Or
well, I do have a law background, so I graduated from law school, and you know, I took a few courses specifically in international human rights and human rights in law school, but it was really the opportunities that I sought that actually built my career. So my very first position was an internship at the UN in Thailand, and from there I worked in a lot of domestic roles. So domestic in the sense that I didn't come in as an international contract. I came in just as a Canadian earning what local wages were. So I think just building up my experience that way, and a lot of local NGOs and community-based organization in a lot of countries in the global south, the work they're doing is phenomenal. It's phenomenal grassroots work. And so the experience I got there from grassroots activists who represented the communities that they served was, you know, remarkable. And so I wasn't earning a big salary, but the experience was priceless. Yes, and so slowly I built up my career that way. And every time I'd run out of money abroad, I'd come back home to Canada, do some quick legal temping work, earn some money, and go abroad again to be able to supplement the small incomes there. And that way too, I was also able to keep a foot in the human rights in Canada as well. So able to work in at the Human Rights Commission in Ontario. I was the director of a immigrant and refugee settlement agency, Culture Link in Toronto. So I think I've always had this domestic and international perspective that's been, I think, is going to be very useful in my role at Lakehead now.
Thank you for sharing this extensive work that you have been doing. We'll take again a very short break. Dreeni and dear viewers, stay tuned. We'll be right back.